So I want to start by talking through a couple of key ideas that I want us to focus on throughout our time together today. First of all, we have a lot of barriers right now in terms of nutrition communications and educating consumers from an evidence-based standpoint in order to create behavioral changes. And there are a lot of barriers to that, but there's also been a lot of breakthroughs, and we're going to talk through some of those right now. We're going to assess current communication gaps about nutrition, ingredients, health, and taste, because we haven't talked about that in a couple hours, and I think that's something we are certainly keen on circling back to. We're going to identify areas of improvement for education and the benefits of whole grains, and apply tangible strategies for improving nutrition messages at all levels of knowledge, areas of the industry, and stages of behavior change. So one thing that certainly Oldways does an incredible job of is bringing heritage to the forefront in terms of culture, cuisine, and how that relates to health. And one thing that is ubiquitous across the literature, but is also key to a variety of different dietary patterns that we see around the world, is that all of them have a number of things in common. And a lot of the data that we look at as educators and as healthcare professionals has deep roots in historical and cultural context. So I showed 3 different papers. All of them are review papers, and these are great examples of just some ways in which we see some kind of buzzy terms being used in literature, and I want us to kind of use this backwards approach of looking at the fact that there are a lot of trendy terms out there, and there are many people who even believe that something like a Mediterranean diet is trendy as opposed to an actually validated or scientifically based style of eating and a lifestyle. And then there are the diets that have risen to, U.S. News and World Report named DASH diet the #1 diet for weight loss and for overall health last year. And it's fascinating to me that so many people, and certainly so many of the millennial consumers, do not know what the DASH diet is. So I included that in here just as a little bit of context about what has the most evidence, where the abundance of research is, and what dietary patterns that actually promote health really look like. But we know that they are always based on a deep sense of food culture, that the diets that promote health have social, agricultural, political, familial ties, as well as a relationship with food around community and around the land, around the areas in which we live and work. And they are universally plant-based, which is very interesting considering some of the things that we're going to look at in the coming slides. But what has been more interesting at this moment in time more than ever is the way that search engine optimization drives some of what we look for, of where the data goes as a result. And I believe it was Jaclyn or Marissa who said earlier that there is this greater abundance of data that comes with trends, and a lot of that has to do with one kind of coming before the other, but they're actually working in a rather interchangeable way. A lot of the time we see data drive the need for consumer response or food industry response to different trends, but we also see that there is greater funding and greater opportunity for certain trendy topics as a result of high search. So that's something interesting to sort of think about as we go. So one thing that we need to always come back to is that taste is the #1 for all consumers. We always know that. It's not nutrition unless you eat it, and we'll get to that in a moment. But really, everything about eating, even in the landscape of convenience, it has to be experiential. There has to be a story that you're telling both as a person, as a brand, and certainly in the context of speaking about cultural context and historical context, there has to be something about accessibility of a product that drives a slight desire for aspiration. So I like to think of this a little bit as a Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, is that there is 20% that's aspirational and there's that 80% core that's attainable and tangible for consumers. There's also, this is the middle box that we see here, where it says convenience, fast, easy, nutritious, delicious, is a kind of coined term at Good Housekeeping right now. It's something that we look at in terms of all of our recipe content, our recipe development, as well as what we talk about in terms of nutrition and the health-related content that weaves in and out of the magazine in our multiple channels. It's important because the need for speed has become something that, we have spoken about convenience before, but there is this kind of ever-growing need for speed. I actually, on a more personal note, I came out of a meeting just last week where the head of Hearst Books was saying, well, that's nice that we had 20-minute meals, but what about 5-minute meals? So there is this kind of ever-growing desire for making things as efficient as possible, as convenient as possible, but not sacrificing, certainly we know this at the core demographic, the millennial consumer does not want to sacrifice in any area. So that is really where we, as industry professionals have a unique opportunity to kind of go with that and see what we can come up with in terms of providing not just the right message, but also the right products. And at the end of the day, in terms of nutrition and health, of course, it has to actually be health promoting, and there's a lot of myths, and there's a lot of claims, and there's a lot of mixed messages when it comes to what actually nutritious food looks like. So this is just a screenshot from one of the stories that we did back in January. Oh no, actually this is the July edition. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about content creation in a moment, but one thing that has really resonated with our consumers is going back to something we had just spoken about before, which is the when. So when consumers eat and why they choose what they choose has a lot to do with where they are in a given moment. And it also has to do with timing and things that are happening over the course of a day. Moments are really key to consider when we talk about health, convenience, fast, easy, delicious, nutritious. When it comes to our healthy eating guide, we found that this format, this kind of formula really resonates with consumers. So I'm not sure that you can see this, but all of these, everything that we did in this type of feature and has a problem and a solution. It's answering the questions that I would get in counseling sessions in my previous life as a dietitian in private practice. It also speaks to a lot of the problems that I get submitted to my email address that's published in the magazine. So we have a lot of high interest in this type of area. I can't eat healthy because my family doesn't. I can't lose weight because my spouse doesn't want to lose weight. There are a lot of reasons that are environmental and social and contextual that have so much to do with our food choices. So we look to find solutions that meet consumers where they're at. So on that note, just a little bit about Good Housekeeping. What's interesting and what we have found in a question that many of us who work for the brand get a lot is, how do you survive as a media brand in 2018? Media of all different types is suffering. It's not just print magazines, but one thing that Hearst as a corporation has become truly excited about is having various touch points that go beyond the page. So one noteworthy takeaway is that a lot of the kind of popular opinion, the assumption is that print journalism is dead. But really, it's more that digital brands are having a very hard time surviving on their own as well. So what is unique to Good Housekeeping that has been interesting to kind of watch evolve is that there are different touch points for consumers for where they are in a given moment again, and what they might be doing, why they might pick up a print edition of the magazine versus going online or finding an article online, and what is driving that. And there's a lot of different ways that we have driven that. So the broadcast statistic that I gave there, the 800 million unique viewers, was for a satellite media tour that was part of a paid program that we did for our nutritionist-approved emblem holders, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we now have this in-store moment at the Mall of America. In other words, reaching consumers at various different points also has a way of speaking to and showing them what needs you can meet as either a brand, as an educator, or as anyone looking to promote products. So the Good Housekeeping seal has been one of these iconic symbols in American households since 1909. It served as a symbol of assurance, trust, quality, reliability. A fun fact that many of you may know or may not know is that the Good Housekeeping seal is on food products, but because it was lesser known, the idea of showing consumers how to make healthier habits by their choices and the choices that they make at the grocery store was something of unique interest to me, because I felt that there was not really a platform for consumers to be able to say, what makes this one better than another one, when there are so many claims riddled all over food products that speak to either an agricultural health halo that's worn by things like the non-GMO project verification, the USDA organic seal, that a lot of these things wear their health halo, but they don't necessarily mean anything about how picking this one product might lead you to have healthier habits overall. So that's where this idea was kind of born from and then developed from there in 2016. I'll go over the macro criteria, because if we were to get into the micro criteria for each product and type of product at the supermarket, we would be here until next week, so I will spare you that. But the general points here is that these are kind of the things that we know consumers look for and value so highly in terms of reliability of brands. Simplicity, transparency, and innovation. Simplicity, these are also very marketing heavy terms that get thrown around a lot. So to clarify our definitions of those, simplicity really refers to the idea of how does something simplify a process of making a healthier choice. And this is ultimately based on, when we talk about healthy, again, a very subjective term. What do we mean by that? We mean these plant-based diets. I'm using the guidance of the Mediterranean diet tenets, and so that is where this kind of developed and sticks back to, is that limiting these kind of sources of added sugar, sodium, and saturated fat from processed food sources, and looking at the more wholesome ingredients and the food product on a whole and how it fits into the context of your day. When we talk about transparency, there's also a lot of opaqueness about what transparency actually means. Transparency, for the sake of our purposes, transparency is, does the ingredients list of a product accurately reflect what the product is and intended for? So is this a candy bar, or is this a protein bar that is, made and designed to be something that is eaten and consumed after you're lifting weights at the gym? As far as innovation, we're looking at supply chain, at technologies, at product development, at the various uses of reaching consumers and how that creates a health message that is in line with ours. And so there are a number of different ways that brands can display their innovation, but a lot of them does have to do with the idea of simplicity. How are you using innovative product ideas and technologies to create something that makes it easier to eat better? So on that note, in terms of thinking about convenience, I found this report from Nielsen. This is a Nielsen 2018 report on health and convenience. And this was illuminating for me because it really supports a lot of the ideas that we have seen kind of growing throughout the body of research, but we hadn't really seen much by way of, this level of consumer kind of intent in terms of purchasing things that really maximize convenience, but without sacrificing health. And so one thing that I love about this is that there's a lot of different areas, and I had this looking a little bit nicer and not cut off in my PowerPoint version, but this is PDF version. We had to have it be adaptable. But the idea is that satisfying the demand for ease, utility, and simplicity, that is the sweet spot that goes throughout our consumer culture. And in terms of health, where does health play a role in this? We have to look at what foods in their most wholesome form can provide this type of ease, utility, and simplicity without overwhelming consumers or denying them of the taste that they so love and enjoy. I circled this part, make it easy for me, make it useful for me, make it simple for me, because I think that really just sums it up. And we'll go through that in a second, because, anyone recognize this? This is the key recommendations from the Dietary Guidelines for Americans from 2015. So one thing that I have spent a lot of time researching and laboring over and examining is that the dietary guidelines do a phenomenal job in terms of summarizing overall the clinical data, the randomized controlled trials, the epidemiological findings, the consumer interest. It's trying to both support industry as well as support health and nutrition science, but there is a little bit of a communication gap. And we see that a lot of times in, and a number of people have brought this up already today, but the fact that we don't eat nutrients, we eat foods. And where we have a big problem with that is the fact that when the dietary guidelines talks about what we should eat, they name foods, but they're very resistant to naming what to cut back on. And a lot of that has to do with, again, a topic that we don't have, we'd be here until probably next year. We'd probably be here until the next dietary guidelines, actually, if we went into the idea of different lobbyists and different key players in the dietary guidelines. But the idea is that in order to satisfy all needs, this has been the way that the government has traditionally, or the USDA, the DHHS, has kind of handled this issue, is to tell us what to cut back on by saying nutrients, by naming nutrients, and not talking about the actual foods. So what does that leave us with? Where does that really put us? It's not that useful, it's not that simple, and it's not that easy, because it means that there's a massive communication gap in terms of how do I actually do that, especially knowing what we just saw on the last slide in terms of health and convenience. How do you apply any of this if you don't know really what to avoid? And how, when you see things like a variety of vegetables, well, there's even controversy within the nutrition community about are potatoes a refined carbohydrate or are potatoes a vegetable? So there's always going to be this kind of conflicting play of scientific findings, and that, as a personal opinion, that to me is a healthy debate, right? That's a great debate. So we want to be arguing about actual data and actual science. We don't want to be left in this kind of murky, nebulous state of not really knowing how to apply the information that we're given. So let's go back to goodhousekeeping.com. So this is an example from an article that I believe is live now. It was not live when I put these slides together. So the idea is that in terms of ease of use, having things that create both the context, so what I wasn't able to fit on this slide is that this is a part of a longer article about health and nutrition benefits of eating pasta and how to do it in the most nutritionally beneficial way. And a lot of this article focuses on the vast varieties of pastas among the aisles at grocery now. So now you can buy pasta in the freezer aisle, you can buy it in the fridge, you can buy it in dry goods, you can buy it at any type of cost. It can have vegetables, it can have things that seem like vegetables, it can have different colors. So there's a lot of different, there's a lot of kind of nebulousness when it comes to what's actually in pastas as a growing category. So there was some interest in that. Now, I will also speak to the fact that something like this provides us with the unique opportunity that we don't, of course, have in print magazines, which is that the second that you decide that you want to make any of these ideas that this content gives you, you can buy the products. And that ability to shop online, so Nielsen data has also suggested that it's 61% of us will be shopping exclusively online for groceries by 2024. Interesting when you consider how much time and energy is spent about placement at the grocery store and where things are and end caps and what makes a grocery store more shoppable, more desirable placement for products. So it's an interesting kind of great equalizer as the as much as social media has also played a role in being the great equalizer among food and nutrition and health messaging. Okay, so in terms of useful content, how do we make content more useful? So Good Housekeeping is known for product testing and consumer product testing. And so one of the things that has been a part of my role and the history of my role as nutrition director is testing of products based on nutritional criteria. So I will set the nutritional criteria based on both a sort of combined effort of using the dietary guidelines, using the latest epidemiology as well as clinical data, and looking at what, as well as consumer data in terms of consumer shopping habits and what consumers are looking for when they look for food and when they look for something more nutritious. So we'll go off of a number of different measures in order to get the actual ideas. And then we will come up with these types of criteria. So you see this criteria here: whole grain as the first ingredient, or it must be a vegetable or a fruit. How making this useful, it works twofold, right? So a story like this will have the benefit of both giving you the best of the test, which is, sort of our terminology for what has tested at the top in terms of taste, and that's specific to nutrition, of course, and specific to food products in this context. But among all areas of consumer products, we look for what tests the best with consumers and why, and we are checking for variables that are meaningful to consumers. So we'll hear a lot of times with the latest and greatest technologies. For example, this is probably the best area of sharing with you. Some of the things that we hear from our readers is that the best headphones and the best television are only as great as your ability to use them. I was going to say eat them, but the same can be true of snacks, right? And the same is true of all food products. Your best intentions, it's only as healthy as long as you're going to actually eat it. So when you think about it in that context, that's where the same kind of lifestyle application comes into play and becomes so important. So this kind of shopping navigator serves as both these are our top tested products, as well as sharing that kind of healthy snack checklist in terms of what to actually look for when choosing a snack for you and your family, so that even if you hate everything on the next 3 pages, you still have a takeaway that you can use when you go food shopping. So, simple. This is always a funny one that I'm sure many of us have seen in the room in terms of recent sound bites. At the end of 2015, Mintel did a survey and found that cereal was an inconvenient breakfast choice because millennials found that they had to clean up after eating it, which of course was like great fodder on morning shows and had a lot of talk even on late night television. But the idea behind some of this really shows a unique turning point in terms of where our cultural shift is coming into play. The need for convenience is outweighing, in some ways and in some areas of our lifestyles, it outweighs the taste. Because what if you can find something that tastes just as good, but you can take it on the go? And in fact, I often use that this is obviously a sample size n equals 1 here, but I always use this example that is kind of poignant to me about my own counseling experience. Is that when I was in private practice, the number one question I was always asked was, what can I eat for breakfast that I can eat with one hand? Because I can't eat breakfast and drive my kids to school and get my kids ready and be doing all of the many things I'm doing and try and put mascara on. That's not lifestyle application. Lifestyle application is looking for products that solve this for you. So we try to meet consumers where they're at in terms of their place in life stage, and time of day, which really does play a role. So one thing that I would encourage everyone to think about is looking at lifestyle, accessibility, and seasonality as a means for the kind of key drivers of what creates great content that also can be backed up by the literature. So in terms of nutrition research, I like to think of this as something where we get the foundation from the data. how we apply it has to look more at what's happening in consumer trends, what's happening in both online and offline consumer conversations about various brands, and ultimately provides a little bit of a context for that framework of storytelling that reminds people that eating is also an experience. You're also telling a story every time you choose a product to eat and every time you consume that product. So one way that has been something that has been sort of a ubiquitous kind of reoccurring theme for us is this idea of which is better. The idea is that, what we wind up getting a lot of in terms of questions and outreach for consumers is that a lot of people, some of that polarization in terms that we have been talking about all day in terms of super healthy versus, really indulgent, or very much, in line with the picture of health and the Instagrammable picture of health, which is something we didn't even get to today, but we can certainly go there later, is that there has become this kind of polarization in terms of, and Marissa mentioned this earlier about the body positivity versus the, but I want to lose weight, but how do I get skinny really fast? That type of ideology comes from media a lot of the time, and we have to take responsibility for that. So instead of going through this process of always just kind of denying the way consumers eat, it's sort of showcasing the acceptance by sharing what would make something a better choice at a given moment, and why would you be eating that product. So I'll use one example from something that's actually not up there, but one of these was about a cotton candy versus candy apple. Okay, well, I think we can all agree that none of those or none of the above would be the most nutritious choice, right? Ideally, you would eat fruit as fruit, and you would eat cotton candy when you're at the fairgrounds looking for cotton candy. But in our current climate, it's to ignore that that's happening is irresponsible, right? So ultimately, my answer was to go with the cotton candy, because fruit is best served as fruit. And candy is best served as candy, right? Can you think of anything more transparent than candy? I mean, candy is just designed to be there looking like a treat as an impulse purchase on your way out of the supermarket, right? So there's a lot to be said about the context and providing that kind of framework for consumers. Okay, so Kathleen said fake news, and I like it. And certainly we hear this term thrown around all the time lately, but the idea is that some of this mixed media messaging has an origin that is new. So we talked a little bit about the origin of that polarization, but there is a kind of emerging new mixed media message that has come from SEO, that's the search engine optimization, and the terminology that has arisen and the reasons why certain things become things at all that we wind up talking about. So great example is ketogenic diet, which we'll look at in just a moment. But there's also that kind of lacking of touch points for consumers about health, taste, and an actually nutritious dietary pattern, right? So sometimes you'll read an article, and it will be a great article about health, but you don't know what to do with that. And the service element, and certainly in consumer lifestyle journalism, the service element has to provide something that is useful for the consumer and useful for the reader, but that also shares knowledge that may be new, insightful, or old, but repackaged in something kind of new. But that again, always comes back to that kind of heritage and history of how and when we eat, and incorporates that into this whole term that we like to call lifestyle. There's also a lot of confusion about what the difference is in terms of dining out versus meals at home, and how to eat on the go in a better way, and what does on the go actually mean. And certainly convenience has a very, very new definition now. So convenience used to mean a lot of the things that Emily shared before, and that a lot of the things that we see that is like these packages that we associate with total junk. But convenience truly means something that makes it easier for you to make a better choice, right? I mean, and certainly as healthcare professionals, we can say such things like that. That's what convenience should mean. But it does have to make it easier to make food accessible for you, and to make information accessible for you as well. So combining those two things is what makes for a better story. Oh, I'm running out of time. I have to hurry. Okay, so I'm going to end with a couple with a couple more slides quickly. But I always say, this kind of idea of patterns versus portions is one thing about the dietary guidelines that I really love. This shift towards healthier eating patterns is really important because the term portion is about as dead as a doorknob, if I may say. Consumers hear the term portion and they just want to go to sleep. Because there's nothing that sounds a little bit more restrictive than like portion control and moderation, right? When there are other ways that we could be emphasizing nutritious foods. So that's one kind of important point I want to make here. Okay, I will end with this kind of last little nugget of information that's fascinating to me. In my kind of newer foray into exploring search engine optimization. So the number one article at the end of January on goodhousekeeping.com that outperformed us for the year. So this was our top story. It has stayed the top story, the top health story across Hearst brands, and is on goodhousekeeping.com is this little quick post I wrote up about the ketogenic diet. And because it went live on January 24th, and because it had been a growing search term at the end of 2017, it bumped us to the top and to number one on Google. So the algorithm for Google has since changed. Is everyone familiar with that, just out of curiosity? So for a little primer for those who have not heard of this yet. So Google algorithm changed with this massive update that very much benefits anyone who works in the field of education or in the field of cost saving. So it's called Your Money, Your Life is the name of the update, and it has essentially bumped the content created by healthcare professionals, so people with a credential, so many people in this room, and helped kind of boost that type of content written by healthcare professionals to the top of the search, meaning that if a physician is writing an article about heart health, this should take priority in terms of what we read online, as opposed to reading an article that just is telling you a roundup of different heart healthy ideas written by an editor. So that's just one thing I want to keep in mind, because these are top performing whole grain stories on gh.com. Ketogenic diet is still the outperformer on top of all of that. So that is where I see a unique opportunity for us to kind of repackage in terms of the content and show, and that is kind of the ideology behind the pasta story idea, is showing consumers how to actually do this and apply it. Okay. We've talked about this already, so I won't go far into that, but this is where I want to end. It's just to think a little bit more about how history and heritage through flavor, in-store positioning as well as online positioning, of course, as these various touch points for consumers in terms of products, education, information, where that can live and how it can take different roles across the course of someone's day. How product packaging is so meaningful now in a way that it never used to be, because there's a requirement for sustainability, but there's also a requirement for individual serving size and reducing food waste and maximizing convenience. So how can we collectively think about that as a group? And then there's also the idea of website and marketing as a means to which people can engage with the brand. And Kathleen said earlier that better is the new perfect, and I couldn't agree with that more. And I also think that for brands, the way that translates to new product development is authentic is the new perfect. There is an idea of being true to your authentic self, and what I said before about candy is another good example, right? Candy has never tried to be anything other than what it is.